it going, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. I want to give a quick welcome to all the new subscribers that have came in the past week or so, and a huge thank you for all the support that I've gotten on my last upload. It is truly wild to me, and I'm hoping it is a sign of more good things to come. But anyway, in this week's video, my dog's gonna scratch himself really loudly. In this week's video, I'm going to be painting two dolls as it is my very late... In this week's video, I'm going to be painting two dolls for my very late Valentine's Day special. I'm sure you could tell by the thumbnail and title of this video why exactly this video has run so late, but you know, sometimes the unexpected can lead to some creative choices you would not have otherwise made. But anyway, let's hop right into it. Our candidates for these makeovers are these Hair Adorables dolls that came in a prom 2-pack that I bought on clearance. And let's just say it became very apparent why exactly they were so discounted. What the Are you Are you serious? So I was explaining to my husband my theory on why his hand broke, because I realized that this joint doesn't actually move. So every single time I was posing his hands, I was just putting stress on the peg, and eventually it just fell off. Well, as I was demonstrating my point to him, I went to go move this hand to test it out to see if this joint was also broken, and I also snapped this hand off. So now he has 0 hands. I think we're gonna have to pivot our concept for this one. A while ago, I purchased these Final Faction gun accessories from the Dollar Tree, and I figured they would make good potential replacements for his missing appendages. So first, I needed to saw his forearm in half because I figured attaching the guns right at the wrist would make his arms freakishly long. This was actually my first time using this jeweler saw that I had purchased, and it was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be because I don't own a vice grip, so I just had to hold it in my little hands while I was sawing into it, and it didn't really work very well. So I ended up swapping off to an X-Acto knife to finish the job because I was struggling really hard. Once I had cut around all the edges, I took some pliers and ripped it the rest of the way off. Next, I need to drill a hole into his little forearm nubs in order to create a space for me to feed in a wire. If I want to be able to anchor the guns to the arms, I have to drill some holes in them as well. Next, I passed a wire through the hole in the gun and just sort of twisted it around to keep it in place, and slid the end of the doubled up wire into his arm bits and just hot glued it in place. I'm sure an epoxy glue or a super glue would work very well for this because I think those are really good at adhering plastic, but you know, hot glue works in a pinch. I wanted to use more of the synthoid accessories, so I decided to add an extra set of guns on his back. That's what this little bit is. Like, I imagine the little heads come up and they like shoot lasers or something, you know? At this point, I took a break from working on his body to start preparing his head. Getting this flocking off was truly a nightmare. It was very messy, and for some reason they covered his whole head with it, even though it was only visible on the sides when the doll still had hair. His head was just way too big to fit in between the guns poking over his shoulders, so I decided I needed to make some adjustments. So I've never modified a doll head like this before. I've shrunken a few using the acetone method, but I guess I was in a rush, or maybe I just really wanted to change the head shape. I don't really know what my thought process was here, but I decided to cut a big gash in the back and just remove a bunch of the vinyl and then re-sew it together so that it would be more narrow. To do this, I'm using an embroidery needle as well as some embroidery thread because it's more sturdy and the thick embroidery needle is a lot easier to pass through the vinyl of the head. Even though this part was kind of challenging, it was also really fun because I felt so like a mad scientist, you know, like stitching this guy back together. And I feel like that's kind of fitting for the sort of sci-fi theme for these dolls. The view from the back of his head kind of reminds me of like a really messed up football. Once he's all stitched up, I go over everything with some hot glue in order to fill in the gaps as well as create a slightly smoother surface to the back of his head. His head shape still wasn't quite right yet. His jaw just flared out a lot, and so I decided to just shave it down with an X-Acto knife to get a silhouette that I liked better. I'm going over his cheeks with some air dry clay in order to smooth out the parts that I cut down. If you have something to sand vinyl with, which I know you can do with like a Dremel and stuff, I think, you can probably also use that in order to achieve this, but I don't have one of those, so I'm using clay. And while I had the clay out, I got to work sculpting his arms. So my goal with this was to make it look like these guns were like organically growing out of his arms, because the story I came up with in my head is that he's like this genetically engineered super soldier that, like, you know how like every sci-fi thing has some like evil government entity, and so they like made a bunch of these like genetically engineered super soldiers who are only made for combat, so they have gun arms. And he's one of those. Originally, when his first hand fell off, I was like, okay, cool, he could have a singular gun arm. That would be pretty dope. But then his second hand fell off, and I was like, well, I guess they both have to be guns now. And I do realize that raises a lot of questions about the logistics of taking care of yourself when you have gun arms, but I decided that they also have a sort of like telekinetic ability, so like they could just, you know, move certain things with their minds in order to deal with the usual maintenance of being a organic being. On his arms, I'm trying to match a similar texture as to what's on the back piece, just so it all looks cohesive. I was also trying to keep the design kind of simple because originally I was in a rush to get this done before Valentine's Day, and well, you know, that didn't happen. I'm sanding his chest so that I can add some clay there as well. His arms just looked too bulky for the rest of his torso, and you know, he's a super soldier, okay? He needs some respectable man titties. I guess I could have said pecs, but I've chosen not to. This sculpt didn't need to be perfect because it basically just served to help fill out his shirt later. After trying a lot of methods that looked very bad, I ended up just going over everything with a dark blackish blue and then going in with white to sort of create these areas of brightness inside each little individual ridge in the sculpt. And it took a very long time. Originally, I tried basing everything out in the lighter color and then dry brushing the darker color over the top to sort of leave the lighter color in the recesses, but it was just way too messy, and, you know, unfortunately, to get the clean look that I wanted, I had to paint every line individually. Sometimes you can only do things the hard way. After I finished basing all the light areas out in white, I went over every single line again in pink because that's the color it's supposed to be. I just used white first in order to help the color be a little brighter, pop a little bit more, you know? At some point, I got really messy with this because it was just a really tedious process, and unfortunately, I could be kind of impatient. So I'd rather kind of rush things and then go back and fix mistakes later, as opposed to just like be careful and avoid the mistakes in the first place, which is something that I'm sure I could work on. I think if I were to do this project a second time, I would use more colors for the bright portions, like maybe do like a pink and a purple and do like a fade gradient, like the colors are sort of changing. I want him to look like a gamer keyboard is basically what I'm saying. If I were to do this again, I would have made him look a little bit more like a gamer keyboard. I also think if I were to do something like this again, I'd want to invest a little bit in trying to like do some cool lighting effects. I think that would have been really cool, but unfortunately I didn't really plan ahead because I didn't think this was the doll I was going to be making. Now we can move on to his face up. So once again, another kind of struggle time for me. So these dolls have these huge flat eye spaces because they have these massive eyes. So I didn't have a very strong guide to work with. And also there's something about male dolls that just make me forget how to paint for some reason. I feel like I've never made a male doll that I haven't like struggled profusely with their face up. I don't know why. I guess I just need more practice making masculine faces. At some point I realized that this doll has a lot in common with the Cybergoth Barbie that I made for Pride last year. So he has sort of a bisexual color scheme going for him that was entirely unintentional, but you know, I think that's fun. I think even his makeup look is pretty similar to hers, but by the time that I realized it, it was already too late for me to be willing to do anything about it, so I guess they're just twinsies. And of course, once his face is done, I go over it with several very watered down coats of liquid sealant. I personally use matte Mod Podge for this, but I know some people struggle with it. It hasn't given me problems, so I continue to use it. Now we can get started on his outfit. So I'm modifying this BTS doll shirt that I've had lying around in my spare doll clothes for a while. It's a sort of like white muscle tank that I thought would work pretty well. I'm splitting it down the back and making it more narrow, as well as opening up the armholes so that his massive gun arms can fit through it. For both the outfits that I'm making in this video, I really wanted to utilize doll clothes that I already had and just change them to fit my needs, because personally I enjoy like modifying garments a lot more than making them. I just think it's more fun. Once I finished that, I glued everything in place, and later I add things to the back to make it look more complete. Continuing the trend of using things I already had, I happen to have these Hunter Huntsman boots that I thought were absolutely perfect for this, and it was honestly a huge relief because I do not like making shoes. So it was nice not have to worry about that. I did, however, give them a fresh coat of paint and add a little bit of dry brushing to bring out the details and help them fit in with everything a little bit better. While I had that paint out, I decided to also add some dry brushing to his back piece as well as his guns. I decided to go in with some metallic silver paint to bring a little bit more attention to the little studs on these boots. I'm not entirely sure what those little circles are, but I decided to treat them like studs. For his pants, I'm just darkening the zippers on these Ash Silverstone Shadow High pants that I honestly thought I would never get any use out of because I thought they were kind of ugly, but for this project, I think they're perfect. Moving on to his hair. So I'm using this purple yarn that is the exact color of my usual backdrop because I'm so very smart, and I'm using it to make flocking. So to do that, I'm just bunching up a bunch of it and taking little teeny tiny cuts to make little chunks of yarn. It's another tedious process, but in the end you end up with something like this. To apply it, I'm using more Mod Podge and covering the sides of his head with it. I'm going for a undercut sort of look. I always insist on applying Mod Podge with my hands because I know if I use a brush, I'll absolutely ruin it because I don't wash my brushes enough. Next, I press the flocking against his glue-covered head. At this stage, he's kind of giving clown, which, you know, is kind of fun. Once the glue has fully dried, I go in and brush off the excess. I wore a dust mask for this part because I felt like it probably was not good to inhale. At this point, he's still looking pretty patchy and lumpy, so I'm going in for round 2. So I'm applying more Mod Podge and more flocking and just pressing everything down into the glue the best I can. You'd probably get a smoother result if you chopped up the yarn a little bit finer than I did, but that's just something I've always kind of struggled with. When the flocking is finished, I added regular yarn wefts to do the rest of his hair, and at this point he's kind of giving Guile from Street Fighter, but it won't be that way for long. I want him to have a tight curly hair structure, so I'm using this embroidery needle as a teeny tiny curling iron by heating it up with a hair straightener and wrapping very small chunks of hair around it at a time. Be very careful if you do this because obviously you're getting very close to a very hot needle. This is what it looks like a fair bit of time later with everything curled. I'm not keeping it this way though, I just want the texture from it, so I'm pulling all of the curls apart to get the look that I want. This part is so satisfying and I really love the look that it gives. This was my first time using that embroidery needle technique, and I'm really excited to use it on more dolls after this because I'm so happy with how it came out. It wasn't until he had hair that I really started liking this project. Off camera, I made him this little belt accessory, and then I started distressing his clothes. So for the next part of his story, I like to imagine that he defected from this, evil space sci-fi government and joined a group of rebels or whatever, and so he's a fugitive, he's on the run, getting in battles all the time, so his clothes are gonna get a little tore up, a little dirty, a little gritty, To achieve the stained look, I'm going over the shirt with several different colors of chalk pastel and spreading it around with a wet finger. I decided to use this sort of light beige, a light gray, as well as this purpley pink color because I just thought it would kind of tie the colors together a little bit more, and I thought it could sort of represent weird mutant blood or something. I used the same colored pastels on the pants, but for the pants, it's giving it more of a dusty look as opposed to a stained look, but I think that works just as well. Now that he's about finished, we can move on to working on his girlfriend. So because I bought them as a pair, I wanted to keep them as a pair. However, now that I've changed his head dramatically, she no longer looks like she exists in the same world as him. So I decided to swap her head out for a Cave Club head because I feel like the proportions are a little bit more comparable. So I'm going ahead and getting her prepped and matching her skin tone the best that I can. I don't usually match normal flesh tones very often, but I tried my best. So for her, I like to imagine that she's either a member or the leader of this little rebel group, and they have like a chance encounter or something, and he has the opportunity to turn her in, but instead he lets her go, and then she sways him over, to their side, and then they like fall in love or whatever. But I want her to be kind of cute and pretty, but also have like some hints of battle wear. So she has the scar over one eye. I like to think she lost it and had it replaced with this cybernetic eye. While I wanted like a hint of toughness, I also like to think she's kind of sunshiny too. I think this project is the most that I've ever thought about like the personalities and the stories behind the characters I was making, because that's not really a part of doll customizing that I typically indulge in. But, because the whole point of this one was I was making a weird sci-fi romance concept, it seemed appropriate. I'm going to take this time while I'm blushing her face to say, if you watch this far and you like this video, consider liking it. It really helps me out a lot. And if you want to see more videos from me, consider subscribing. I have a lot of really fun ideas coming down the pipe, and if you don't want to miss them, hit that little button. If you have any thoughts about these dolls and their love story, or things you'd like to see me do in the future, go ahead and leave those in the comments below. I love reading them. And if you're interested in purchasing a doll from me, the link to my shop is in the description. Once her face is finished, I could seal it in and move on to her hair. For her hair look, I'm keeping it pretty simple. I'm just gluing some strands of yarn around the perimeter of her head so that I could pull it back into a very spiky, floofy little ponytail. For her outfit, I'm also modifying some rainbow high clothes. So these are Sunny Madison's pants, I believe, that I had once again just lying around, and I am sort of cutting them up so that they can fit her a little bit better, and I am heavily distressing them. Distressing clothes is probably one of my favorite things to do, so it was really fun having the opportunity to do it so much. Once I have everything frayed how I want it, I soak the pants in water and then hit it with some black paint to sort of give them more of this like washed out gray look as opposed to the yellow. Here's how they look finished. They are very high-waisted because she has the shortest torso ever. For her top, I'm just cutting this bit of fishnet to make a shirt, as well as taking this bit of elastic cord to make a tube top, and then just sliding the fishnet over the tube top to give a little layered moment. We have Sunny Madison to thank for a good chunk of this outfit, because this is also her jacket that I decided to give the same distressing treatment that I gave her shorts. It's a bit big for her, but I kind of enjoy the oversized look. For her shoes, I just cut the heels off the boots that she came with, and in the shot you can see the band-aid for the injury I sustained while doing this. I decided that she also needed a gun, so I'm painting this little alien pistol that also came in the final faction set. The final accessory that I need to paint are these little goggles that came with Riley, I believe, from the Wild Hearts Crew doll line. Once I finished these, I did a couple of more things off camera, and then they were done. And here are the final results. I am so obsessed with them. I'm actually going to keep these for a little while. They won't be going up in my shop at this time because I want to take some more pictures with them and just look at them for a little longer. But anyway, that's about it for me. Hope to see y'all next time. Love you, bye!